a group of people operate completely outside the bounds of law and morality for decades. And the sources suggest that to understand that, you have to look at their belief systems. Even if that leads us into some very uncomfortable territory with ancient deities and modern espionage.
So let's just rip the Band-Aid off. Let's start with the FBI files. The source material highlights specific correspondence regarding victim testimonies. Now, usually when you hear about these files, you hear about assault, which is horrific enough.
Right. And sadly, we've become almost desensitized to hearing assault in the news.
But the text here is different. It specifically mentions ritualistic acts involving newborn babies.
Yeah.
That is a direct phrase from the reports from witness testimony.
It is. And this is the part of the files that often gets redacted or just ignored by the broader media coverage. And the Force argues that's intentional. Not necessarily because of some coordinated cover-up in every newsroom, but because it's frankly just too extreme for the average person to process. It triggers cognitive dissonance. You read that and your brain just says, no, that can't be real. That's movie villain stuff.
It feels like fiction. But the source emphasizes these details are in the reports. And they don't treat it as just random sadism. They draw a direct line from these modern allegations way back to ancient history. They bring up a name that I think a lot of people have heard, maybe in horror movies, but don't know the actual history of: Moloch or Molech.
Right. And to be clear, this isn't just folklore or, internet rumors. If you look at the historical and theological context, Moloch was a Canaanite deity.
Okay.
In the ancient world, specifically in the Levant, the worship of Moloch was explicitly, undeniably associated with child sacrifice. I mean, it wasn't a metaphor, it was a practice.
A literal practice.
A literal practice where children were passed through fire to guarantee prosperity or, power for the elites of that time.
And this is something that shows up in major religious texts, doesn't it? It's not some hidden history.
Absolutely not. It is condemned in the strongest possible terms in the Hebrew Bible. You see it in Leviticus, Kings, Jeremiah, and it's condemned in the Quran. Historically, across the Abrahamic faiths, this specific type of worship is seen as the ultimate abomination, the absolute antithesis of civilized morality.
So the argument the source is making is that this ancient practice didn't actually die out, it just went underground.
That is exactly the argument, that there's a continuity of evil. And the source points to what they call symbolic architecture on Epstein's private island, Little St. James.
You mean the temple?
The temple. You see the drone photos, I'm sure. That strange, blocky building with the golden dome painted in stripes. It had these distinct patterns, statues that look like owls or something ancient.
Right. The media kind of brushed it off as eccentric billionaire taste.
Exactly. Weird art for a weird guy. But when you look at it through this lens, you layer that specific architecture over the whistleblower accounts of rituals involving children.
It starts to look less like bad taste and more like a
functioning temple. It suggests intent.
That is. It's terrifying to think about. That we're not just dealing with criminals who like to break the law for fun, but maybe true believers in something darker.
And that's the key distinction, isn't it? If they're just criminals, they're driven by greed or lust. But if they're believers, they're driven by ideology. They believe that these acts give them power.
Which brings us to the second pillar here.
Right. If they're believers, what are the tools of their trade? And the source material dives right into Epstein's library and his collection.
Yeah, this really stood out to me. We know he was a wealthy guy, he bought art, but records show he was purchasing books on Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, and other ancient traditions, specifically associated with black magic. It wasn't just stock tips and physics journals on his shelves.
It suggests a fascination with the provocative and mythological, as the source puts it. But there is one specific allegation in our stack that, I have to be honest, it just stopped me in my tracks. It's hard to wrap your head around.
You're talking about the kiswa.
The kiswa.
Okay, for anyone listening who might not be familiar with that term, can you explain what the kiswa is? Because when I read this, my jaw just hit the floor.
So, to understand the gravity of this, you have to understand the geography of the faith. The Kaaba in Mecca is the holiest site on earth for over 1 billion Muslims. It represents the house of God.
Right.
The kiswa is the sacred black cloth embroidered with gold Quranic verses that drapes the Kaaba. It's changed annually. It is considered deeply, profoundly sacred. Pieces of it are sometimes gifted to foreign dignitaries as a sign of massive respect.
And the source material alleges.
It alleges that Jeffrey Epstein was gifted pieces of this sacred cloth.
Why, just pause for a second. Why would a guy like Epstein, who, as far as we know, has zero religious interest in Islam, want a piece of the holiest object in the Muslim world? Is it just a trophy? Like, I have this rare thing.
See, the source argues it goes so much deeper than just collecting rare stamps or art. They introduce this concept of desecration rituals.
Desecration rituals. Okay, break that down for us.
Well, think about the psychology of someone who wants to be a god on Earth. How do you prove you're above the law? You break the law and get away with it. But how do you prove you're above God?
You take something holy.
And you defile it. You take something that millions of people revere, something they would die to protect, and you use it as a decoration or a rug or a prop in your perversions. The source posits that these items are used to signify a total rejection of divine law.
It's a power move.
It's the ultimate metaphysical power move. By desecrating the sacred, the elite reinforce their own feeling of being untouchable. It's a psychological mechanism to detach from the moral laws that govern the rest of humanity. It's saying, your God can't touch me, I am my own God.
That is profoundly disturbing. It paints a picture of narcissism that borders on insanity. But it actually segues perfectly into the next question, because if you have this God complex, if you think you're untouchable, you need the money and the power to back it up.
You need the machinery.
Right. And that brings us to the intelligence web.
This is the how. We've talked about the why and the ritual, but now we have to talk about the machinery.
Yeah.
Because without the machinery, Epstein is just a creep. With it, he's a global threat.
Exactly. Because one of the biggest mysteries has always been, how did Jeffrey Epstein, a college dropout, a former school teacher with no visible means of generating this immense wealth, become a billionaire?
It's the billion-dollar question. He didn't invent anything. He wasn't a hedge fund genius in the traditional sense. His clients were. Very few and very mysterious. And the source argues clearly, Epstein was a front. He was the operator of a sophisticated blackmail engine.
And you can't talk about Epstein's operation without talking about the Maxwells. We all know Ghislaine Maxwell. But the source material really zooms in on her father, Robert Maxwell.
Robert Maxwell is the key to understanding the geopolitical scale of this. If you don't know the name, he was a media mogul in the UK think Murdoch level. But he was so much more than that. He was a titan. And the source lists his documented intelligence connections, and it is a heavy, heavy list.
Yeah, let's run through that, because usually a spy works for one country, maybe a double agent for second if they're daring, but the source claims he had ties to MI6.
British intelligence, correct.
Soviet intelligence.
And Mossad. Israeli intelligence? Yes, that is the trifecta. Being connected to one of those is significant. Being connected to all three. That implies a level of double, triple agent status that is almost unheard of. It means he was trading information at the highest levels of the Cold War.
He was a bridge between worlds.
Yeah.
And the source gives this incredibly vivid detail to back that up. His funeral. Robert Maxwell's funeral wasn't just a family affair.
No, not at all. Far from it. When he died, mysteriously falling off his yacht, he was buried on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, one of the most prestigious burial spots in the Jewish faith. But the source notes it resembled a state funeral.
A state funeral?
Attended by the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of Israel.
You don't get that kind of send-off unless you are deeply, deeply embedded in the state apparatus.
Exactly. The president doesn't show up for a newspaper publisher unless that publisher was a critical asset in national security.
So, connecting the dots here. If Ghislaine's father was a super spy working with Mossad, the KGB, and MI6, and then his daughter ends up running a honey trap operation with Jeffrey Epstein.
The implication, as the analysis in our source suggests, is that the Epstein operation wasn't just personal depravity. It was a legacy operation.
A family business.
A multi-generational intelligence operation designed to entrap and compromise Western leaders. Epstein wasn't the mastermind, he was the manager.
That puts a whole new spin on the impunity we talked about earlier.
Of course.
If you're gathering dirt from major intelligence agencies, they are going to protect you. They have to protect you.
Precisely. You become a protected asset. The blackmail isn't just for money, it's for geopolitical leverage. Think about the cameras in every single room of Epstein's houses. The massage rooms, the bedrooms. The source argues those weren't for home movies, they were for insurance. For control.
This is so heavy. I mean, we're talking about child sacrifice on one hand and global espionage on the other. It feels like two different worlds. How does a spy ring connect to Moloch worship? It seems disjointed. But the source ties them together using a very specific moral framework.
It does. And honestly, I found this part of the deep dive particularly illuminating. Regardless of your personal religious background, it provides a kind of logic to the chaos. The source uses an Islamic moral framework and a specific term, tagut.
Kakut. Okay, I've heard the term in religious contexts, but let's define it clearly for the listener in this context. What does it actually mean?
So, in the Islamic worldview, tagut is often translated simply as idol,
Yeah.
but it's much broader than that. It refers to anything that is worshipped instead of the one true God. But it's not just about bowing to statues.
Okay.
It refers to the worship of false systems, the worship of power, and specifically the act of transgressing the bounds.
Transgressing the bounds.
Right. It frames the elite's behavior not just as criminal, but as a form of idolatry. When a ruler or a billionaire decides that the laws of nature and morality don't apply to them, that they can do whatever they want with other human beings, they're making themselves into a tagut. They're worshiping their own power.
So when they act like they are above the law, they aren't just being arrogant. In this framework, they're engaging in a spiritual rebellion, setting themselves up as rival gods.
Exactly. And that links right back to the rituals. The child sacrifice, the desecration, it's all part of the worship of tagut. And the source quotes a specific verse from the Quran to address the crimes we discussed earlier. Surah al-Isra, verse 31, "Do not kill your children. Surely killing them is a heinous sin."
It's startling how direct that is. It just cuts through all the complexity of the intelligence talk and the money laundering.
It does. It grounds it. It reminds us that the center of this complex spy web is a very simple, very ancient evil. And the source makes another fascinating point about the nature of evil in this framework. We have this cartoon image of the devil, you know.
Right, the guy with the horns, the pitchfork, the red cape. Very scary, very obvious.
But the source discusses Satan, and it argues that evil often disguises itself as sophistication or special knowledge.
That really resonates with the Epstein case.
It really does. Think about Epstein. He wasn't lurking in a dark alley. He was at Harvard. He was funding science labs at MIT. He was surrounded by Nobel Prize winners, princes, and presidents. He was cultured.
That's the disguise.
That is the mask. The source argues that legal complexity, scientific jargon, and philanthropy are often used to mask corruption. It's a way of saying we aren't evil. We are just evolved. We are sophisticated. You peasants wouldn't understand our lifestyle.
That is a chilling thought. That sophistication is just the camouflage for barbarism.
And that leads to the synthesis the source presents. It doesn't actually matter if these elites are literally bowing down to a statue of Moloch in a robe, or if they just have such massive egos that they believe they can do whatever they want.
The outcome is the same.
The outcome is identical. The destruction of the innocent to preserve wealth and power. Whether it's spiritual worship or material worship, the victim is the same. The child is still the victim.
It really strips away the glamour, doesn't it? You see these people on yachts, in private jets, and you think, success! But through this lens, you see talak, you see tyrants.
Exactly. It reframes success as spiritual failure.
So where does this leave us? We've covered the history, the spies, the theology. But the source ends on a note about the current state of affairs. I mean, Epstein is dead, Maxwell is in prison, case closed, right? The bad guy's lost.
Hardly. The source mentions the public is still poring over censored files and what they call sketchy official reports about Epstein's death. But the central theme of the conclusion is that the system remains intact.
The blackmail engine.
The blackmail engine. Think about it logically. If this was a state-level intelligence operation, the data didn't disappear when Epstein died. The hard drives weren't just lost. The records, the videos, the photos, the dirt on prime ministers and CEOs, that leverage still exists somewhere.
And if the system was designed to grant impunity,
then the people who hold those records now still have that impunity. The source argues the network is so pervasive that accountability is almost impossible. They didn't just catch a bad guy. They cut off one head of a hydra. The body is still there.
it makes you question everything you see on the news. When you see a world leader acting strangely, or a policy decision that makes no sense, or a sudden reversal.
You have to wonder what's happening in the shadows. You have to wonder who has the file on that person. Are they acting on their own free will, or are they dancing to the tune of the blackmail engine?